Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 175th Scientific Governance Risk Meeting here at MakerDAO. My name is Peyton. I go by Pros11 online, and I'm one of the governance facilitators. Really happy to be here today, joined by a bunch of awesome Maker people and others interested in the protocol. This is our weekly call where we talk about what's going on in governance, some of the risks the protocol is facing, and try to factor in some open discussion so the community can talk about the points that matter to them. A little bit of ground rules, I guess, to get into before we get started. As you might have noticed, this meeting is being recorded. So hello if you're joining us from YouTube, and thank you for everyone present. We do encourage you speaking up and engaging with the conversation we're having today. However, since this is being recorded and just for everyone's sanity, we ask to please not speak over one another. If you are uncomfortable hopping on the mic or for whatever reason can't do so, feel free to drop a note in the chat. We'll be monitoring that and trying to incorporate things when appropriate. And go for it, David.
Yeah, I just wanted to shout out the raise hand feature. If there are a lot of people talking and you do want to jump in with like a comment, there's a little reactions tab in Zoom, and the very primary reaction at the bottom is raise hand, and that'll put your avatar to the top of our list, and Peyton will be able to kind of prioritize you for who's next.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely appreciate that tool for facilitating the conversation. All right, without further ado, let's get into the agenda, what we'll be talking about today. Well, I'm pointing out there's also a speed up button if you think I'm going too slow. So feel free to chime in with that as well. So as usual, we'll start with our governance roundup, going over the current votes, the MIPs, as well as what has been going on in the forum in the last week. Then we have kind of a presentation / plan discussion portion, where we'll be talking about the offboarding process for core units and facilitators, kind of what we can do better there, lessons learned, and just general discussion on kind of how we can improve that. And then finally, we do have time. There'll be open discussion in case any of your comments or questions don't quite fit into what we're talking about. You'll be able to bring them up at the end of our call here. Awesome. Let's get into the votes. So still a lot up this week on the governance portal. As far as things that ended this week, we did have the 2 weekly polls pass. Those were the open market committee proposal, proposing a number of different rates and parameter changes there, as well as the proposal to decrease the GUNI version 3 USDC2 pair down to 102%, I believe. So those both passed. I'll be updating us on their executive status in the next page. There are still 16 polls ending on Monday. So if you haven't had a chance to vote or check that out, please do so. 5 of them are green lights and the other 11 are ratification polls that we'll go over in the segment after this. As far as tomorrow's executive, you can expect a couple things. We did have to push the emergency threshold, the emergency shutdown threshold, parameter until next week due to complications of the contract. However, you can still expect to see both those polls that passed this week in tomorrow's executive. Only other piece of information is the executive from last week has been passed and executed. That returned the funds lost on optimism, changed a few of the Uniswap LP vault debt floors, and took care of delegate compensation. Awesome. That should do it for votes. For MIPS today, we actually have a special guest speaker. It's going to be Sebex here. Pablo is on vacation this week and passed off his duties to another member of the team.
Hey there, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Hey there. Sebex this week with the MIPS update. As Peyton said, since Pablo is out on vacation still next week, we have a couple of new proposals for RFC this week, but let's see the ratification polls first, which are ending on Monday, so be sure to cast your votes if you haven't already. No major changes in the vote breakdown of the new MIPS, all going with 100% yes, so let's skip this one. The same goes for budgets for core units. Remember, we have budgets for DUX, SES, StarkNet Engineering, and Oracle gas costs. Regarding the core unit onboardings, we can see both strategic finance and tech ops are passing, with tech ops now almost reaching 90% yes. On others, we have the offboarding of the content production core unit that took a turn, and now the yes option is leading with 46%. With 2 recognized delegates still abstaining, the last days for this MIP will be crucial. Then we have the onboarding of Will Remore as facilitator of real world finance, going with the 100% yes. Next are the
sorry, Savix, to interrupt. There, just a quick clarification. The marketing budget and facilitator removal, it's the facilitator removal, not the core unit removal. Just that.
Oh, yes, you got that right. Next are the proposals in RFC, mostly the same proposals in RFC as last week. We have the budget adjustments for risk, collateral engineering services, and Immunify security. We have the offboarding of Philip Bain and the onboarding of Dennis Yilmaz for DUX. And finally, we have the MIP 55 amendment, and we got the new sub-proposals, MIP 63 C4 SP1, SP2, and SP3 for TechOps, Keeper Network, and Gelato Network, which are process components for MIP 63 and are subject to the MIP 63's passing. And I think that's it for MIPs this week. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Great job, Savix. We appreciate you putting that update together. And yeah, look forward to more updates from you. Cool. So I'll get us kind of back to our regular cast of folks here with Artem up next at the Forum at a Glance.
Hey, almost everything's regular. I'm actually thinking maybe just to keep my video off because of hotspot and stuff, just for this week. All right, I just posted the link for the Forum at a Glance. So we'll get started. So welcome everybody to the Forum at a Glance, a weekly review of what's happened on the forums. This time for the week of January 14th up to today, which is January 20th of 2022. And we're beginning with the week's top announcements. Starting off with Real World Finance presenting a methodological criteria to evaluate the MIP6 structured finance transactions. It's intended to capture best practices in the structured finance market and can be considered appropriate also for onboarding real world collateral into Maker vaults. The criteria are intended to provide guidance to potential applicants and the operational core units of MakerDAO. These criteria remain subject to change and further input from the community. So please visit the post to view a complete breakdown of the criteria that's provided. And next up, we have Data Insights, who announced their new data API. They refactored the MCD Vault Tracker API and added cool new features. The team will resume an additional month of maintenance for the old API to allow migration. And changes include backend updates, data query updates, and more stuff that's shown in the Forum at a Glance and their post, along with their next steps to increase the protocol parameter dataset. And next up, we have a 3F delegate who announces that it will vote yes on the governance poll prioritizing Robin Land Holdings for inclusion in the Maker protocol and details the reasoning behind the decision. 3F delegate discusses their thoughts on the founder of Robin Land, Scarlett Chen, as well as the team's ability to improvise. 3F delegate also speaks briefly on future improvements of community greenlight polling. Check out the posts and comments, which also include responses and additional information by Scarlett Chen. And moving on to our top discussions, a significant amount of liquidations triggered slippage on flap auctions during December 4th. And in response, mandated actors were suggested to withdraw funds to avoid more bad flap. Real World Finance used their funds to buy approximately 100 MKR, which converted those DAI at a much better rate than all around the flap auctions at that moment. So Seb right now asks the community whether real world finance should convert that MKR back to DAI and send them to the surplus buffer, which would incur about a 5% slippage when burned, or instead send them to the DS pause proxy for future use by the DAO. Next up, as we inch closer to the 10 bill DAI mark, one question remains, and that's who should get the 10 bill DAI NFT? Many community members submitted their opinions and ideas, such as fractionalizing the NFT to DAI holders or distributing it to DAI minters. There's also a single winner meme competitions and more. So chime in the discussion if you have any ideas on who should get the NFT. And next up, most of us have probably seen what began with Justin Sun borrowing 24,000 MKR from Aave, only to return it. This post actually leads to a thread discussion on improving governance risk and voting requirements. This also helped Dux come up with a potential idea for the governance portal, which should help bring awareness and visibility to situations that might pose a danger to maker governance. Follow the post for additional updates that may just pop up. And finally, a really quick honorable mention, because this post was published right after last week's GNR call and wasn't on the forum at a glance, but Money Supply posted a comprehensive overview of opportunities for Maker to begin serving the NFT lending market. Definitely suggest checking this one out on the forum at a glance or visiting the original post. Now, moving on to our active signal request, there's one signal currently active. The initial signal request that approved the delegated compensation trial implemented a 3-month trial period. And during that trial period, and thereby introduced a performance modifier to the trial, which has been added to the MIP 61. MIP 61, however, has not been submitted for formal submission, and January is the final month covered by the trial. In response to these events, Patrick J signals to the community by asking whether we should extend the delegate compensation trial by a maximum of 6 months, but end it if MIP 61 were to be approved, and this signal ends on January 31st. I am not sure if I lost internet connection during the whole time because it said I did.
Very briefly, but I don't think anything. Yeah, it was for like 5 seconds, but you're fine.
Okay, thank God. Well, that's it for the forum at a glance. Check out the written version, has a 3-point summary, evaluations reports, ongoing initiatives, help wanted, and also some more announcements and discussions that were not mentioned on this video. Thanks.
Awesome, Artem. We appreciate it. And yeah, thanks for highlighting that NFTs collaterals post. It's quite long. I really appreciate the work that went in it from Monet there. Awesome. So that brings us to our discussion topic here. I know David worked pretty hard setting up some potential questions to lead us through this. If you want to start there or introduce the topic, David.
Yeah, sure. I worked
that he worked hard.
Yeah, I worked so hard coming up with the 6 prompt questions. Oh, it was so difficult. But in general, though, as a note, when we do post up the discussion segment for the GNR calls, it would be very helpful. I typically post before the call in the governance chat, asking for feedback and also for suggestions on prompts. So if you do want something specific listed, yeah, feel free to respond there in the governance channel. So yeah, today's topic is about offboarding process for CUs and facilitators. We're going to be focusing on general issues, improvements, and suggestions. And I would really love to encourage recognized delegates and really facilitators to be the primary commenters on this, as well as other stakeholders, voters who might not be delegates necessarily. But in general, this is a question of organizational improvement, ways to, yeah, make things better and less disruptive. I also want to point out that Paper Imperium, in partnership with GFX Labs, are putting together a MIP that has been shared with a few people about kind of amending the existing offboarding process outlined in MIP 39, 40, and 41. So here's the first prompt. Basically, what are the components of an ideal policy for offboarding CUs that prove to be unvital or not worth the spend? could start there. What are the components of an ideal policy? Right now, what we've seen in the current cases, we've seen like with ducks, it was voluntary, where two team members agreed to switch positions essentially. Then we had a couple of different involuntary proposals where people external to a team, a given MakerDAO stakeholder, will propose the offboarding of a facilitator or a CU. We saw that with Seb from Real World Finance, and we're seeing it now with Seth from marketing, from content production. And so, yeah, I wanted to kind of pose that question. Anybody want to jump in?
I would like to say something about the offboarding process. That to me, I recently joined Maker and in September, and to me it was very surprising how the offboarding process is, and it seriously affects the opportunity that the person has of finding a new opportunity outside another DAO. Because so I strongly believe that we should keep the offboarding the way it is as the very last option, and the policy that we kind of create has to cover different processes that we need to follow. So keep the voting because it looks from the outside like public execution. So it really affects. We are in a niche inside a niche, and it's everybody knows everything. So it's very hard to see a person being voted. And the second thing is that I have an idea, which could be, have a small sort of commission with delegates and try to assess the situation. So I think that the power of delegates could be very useful if we could use it here. So try to avoid as much as possible the offboarding situation and try to reach an agreement with the person before leaving that. And I think that delegates could be a very good way of starting this kind of conversation to see if voluntary this person wants to leave or reach an agreement, or maybe MakerDAO could be involved and try to find another opportunity in another co-unit. This is a general point of view from someone that has just joined.
Basically, you want to make sure that there is as little involuntary offboardings as possible. You want to take the steps beforehand so that even if the facilitator might not want to be offboarded, they recognize the reasons and whether they're valid or not. And eventually they kind of come and resign, essentially. Like, you never really want to fire a person. You want to work with them to fix it. And if it can't be fixed, there should be like a kind of amicable resignation kind of thing happening. That's an interesting idea. Also, if you are coming on the mic, before you say anything, just do a brief introduction of yourself. So Mariana, do you want to just mention really quick which incubating core unit you're part of and who you are? Yeah.
Yes, my name is Mariano and I am from Maker Talent. I'm currently, our core unit is currently being incubated by SES. We started in September. Yesterday we had our lunch pod sessions that you can see in YouTube if you're interested. And yeah, I've been attending these permanent sessions that I found quite interesting, and thank you for having me here. So I'm happy to receive any comment that you might have about Maker Talent, because our voting process will start the second Monday of February, and we are working a lot to make it happen. So thank you.
Cool, thanks, Mariana. Yeah, and something that you said there relates to the second question in the prompt, which is who would enforce or perform a policy of review? So there's been this kind of question of, before somebody just goes and posts a proposal to offboard somebody, there has to be a valid reasoning, right? And perhaps there should even be an investigation by some, I don't want to say delegated party, but like some, party. And you mentioned basically forming almost like a committee, like a review committee that's a mix of the delegates and perhaps some key facilitators. And I want to just make a note of that point. That's an interesting point, I think. I see Justin Case has his hand up. Justin, you want to hop in?
There we go. Just a second. Everyone can hear me, right? Okay. Yeah, I want to agree in the larger points that Mariano is making here. I think what is missing from the process right now is signaling and predictability. The vote should probably be the ultimate expression of maker holders' displeasure and will result in removal of facilitator. But my opinion is that the process leading up to that vote is way too short. In a more traditional organizational environment, you're going to have performance reviews going through this. There's probably going to be some sort of chain of command in the organization that is going to signal their displeasure with you in some way long before you even get the performance review. I mean, there's going to be small nudges along the way, and I think this is sort of revealing a little bit part of the weakness of the very flat structure that Maker has organized along, because it's essentially just two levels of organization. You have the maker holders, the DAO level, and you have the facilitator level, and there's no intermediate steps there. So I think a process will have to basically extend the offboarding process into smaller steps along the way. There should be some chance for a facilitator to change course. There should be some way to signal disagreement by the community with the facilitator's actions before getting to the offboarding vote. And of course, we can do that through forum posts, signal requests. There's some ways to do it, but I think there should be a longer, more formalized, more hoops we should jump through before we get to this end state of offboarding someone, because compared to traditional organization, it seems extremely harsh and it seems extremely public, as Mariano showed here. And I think some of that public part of it, I'm not sure we are able to avoid it as long as we're doing it as a DAO. But I think we should do everything in our power to try to make this as voluntary as possible before we get to that point. So I think managing the expectations of the community versus what the facilitator and the unit is doing is a key component in a successful offboarding process. It should not come as a surprise. I mean that the vote should not surprise the person being put up for vote. And that's essentially what I'm getting at here.
Yeah, thanks. Those are really, really great comments. I see MakerMan put his hand up. You're free to take the mic now.
Thanks. So I'll echo Justin here that, when I looked at kind of how this goes, basically it seemed appropriate to have a forum post where someone can bring up a performance issue, right? And then do that in a way that it can be answered, so you'd expect some give or take, right? The idea of going into a poll without even a discussion, much less going to an on-chain poll and making it formal with the maker governance voting, it's all very rushed. If I'm a CU or I'm working here, I'm going to be that's going to scare me a little bit. That is not what happens in traditional appointment, as Justin said, is that typically, in the place where I work right now, when we hire, basically there's a formal probation period where you can be let go for any reason at any time. Now, contractors and maker, that's a little different. And one of the things we really don't have out of the gate with the CUs is kind of what we expect out of them, right? So you look at LPro's post and Demos on marketing, right? And they both have different views of what they expected, right? But that was never really delineated when we brought the CU online as what the timeline was and what the expectations really were, right? And so if you don't have expectations, how can you meet a performance requirement when you're bringing people in, much less how can you question it, right? At some point you can question it. When I look at this and I look at Maker and the stuff that we take on, it's like we can make a $500,000 or $1 million mistake in a year budget on a whatever. We can do a couple of those because we're looking at potentially making $10 million mistakes bringing on collateral. So it's kind of in a wash of a fair amount of money. And so, in some sense, I've dealt with media and production content producers, right? And they're very different beasts. Some of them are very slow, very methodical. Other ones are just going to jump right in and start producing content. What you get is going to vary dramatically. And so With sub, this is a whole other issue, but what I really want to see is I want to see a better process where we can have a review team, but if people have questions, we should bring it out in the forum before we start polling and have a real discussion that involves the people being questioned as well as the questioning people. And then to move this to a more formal process after sufficient time and discussion is had. And the only criteria for a fast offboarding is if someone's actually damaging the protocol, we're losing money, or there's some real tangible hurt to the protocol. Otherwise, we can buy a little bit of time with a couple of weeks to a month. In any organization, unless you're under probation, you can't get rid of someone within 3 months. You have to get them to be retrained or somehow be able to bring up their performance to be able to match before you can even think about getting rid of them. So that's what I got here.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those comments. I also see a really great set of conversation, really rich conversation rather, happening in the chat. So if anybody in the chat wants to bring up some of the things you're mentioning, feel free. But in the meantime, you know, Nick brings up an interesting point that an alternative to public governance-driven offboarding is, you know, governance elects something like an executive branch, which has a duty to kind of do performance reviewing and correction and eventual firing, like MakerMan is mentioning, perhaps not on a 1 month timeline, but something more like a 3 to 4 month timeline. Yeah, that's an idea I wanted to note. Long for Wisdom also mentions, you know, there is a 1 month RFC period for any given proposal that comes through. So although the initial proposal right now doesn't have a strong requirement for listing out the reasons for offboarding, those things, you know, there's kind of like some argument that, you know, 1 month is a decent amount of time, but I kind of tend to agree with MakerMan that it's not. That's my personal view. I see Kianga put up her hand, so yeah, feel free to grab the mic. And then Mariana right after.
Just want to say, in terms of us being a DAO, public versus private, we should hold space to be really, really thoughtful about what may be helpful or appropriate for in the bigger context of this protocol scaling and operating for the long term. And I see that if as a group, there's a public discussion and agreement to have a committee or decide that there's we can put parameters around what's private and what the accountability is around reporting of things that happen privately. I wouldn't want us to just say, oh, it's a DAO, nothing can be private, but that I think that some consideration of what may be helpful in a situation like this. I really resonate with some of the comments about, you know, how this could harm us in terms of attracting the best talent if we don't handle this well, this process, which is super important.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. Feel free to go on, Mariana.
Okay. Yes, I mean, I'd like to highlight how important it is that the initial part consider all these scenarios, because I think we are too focused on performance, and we don't have policies for. And this is something that is also in my pipeline as Maker Talent for diversity or harassment, which are reasons that could be also a reason for offboarding a delegate or offboarding, a facilitator. So we really need to think about what are the scenarios that will lead to this situation, and who are the members of this committee that we are thinking about. Because in terms of harassment, I think that one of the best ideas should be a third party, someone that is completely neutral. In terms of performance, we don't have yet anything in place to score the performance or say if someone is or not performing his job well. And the third scenario that I can see is suspicious activity when it comes to funds or this kind of thing. So these are three scenarios that I see that will lead to completely different investigations and completely different actors involving the offboarding process.
Yeah, and that's why there's a case to be made for kind of the DAO granting somebody responsibility for making that judgment, because there's completely different contexts for different kinds of onboarding, or sorry, offboarding.
Yes, and I think that we need to be very clear on what are the conditions that puts you on one side or another, because that is like it reminds me the policies that they use in social media, right? So either when they are judging, it needs to be absolutely clear that you are on one side or another. So it's a matter of we need delegates involved in this, because the whole community needs to play a part. And yes, I believe that having a harassment policy is something that we need urgently. Having a diversity policy when it comes to hiring, it's also important. But at the end of the day, that leads to another question, which is we cannot have policies and we cannot have core units forcing them to apply to those. So it has to be, maybe this has to be another MIP. So maybe we'll need to all together put together some guidelines of something that we all going to apply to, and then this will be connected to a new offboarding policy, a new harassment policy, diversity policy, and we will put these in a MIP context if that's possible. Not sure if that's possible, David, from if we have a MIP for that, for voting things that we all need to stick to as a DAO. Is that possible?
So I want to actually let Peyton or Long answer that, because they are the governance facilitators, so they know a lot better than I do with regards to that question.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, the simple answer, right, is we go off of what we have, and if we don't have something, then we kind of need a new policy in place. So right now, the core unit MIP set essentially defined what would need to happen for offboarding a core unit. So that's what we're going off of. In some cases, an amendment to that, right, might make a lot of sense. And others, like maybe you want to define like a exit package, or some of the other issues that we're talking about today, where those would probably make sense as a new MIP entirely, right? Because they're not necessarily going on with the direct offboarding of the core unit itself.
Yeah, I also think there's like a point to be made about like strict policies around hiring and like I would rather see recommended policies than like strict policies that are enforced, because at a DAO, like it's all independent teams. Like I think there should be a level of autonomy, especially with regards to hiring decisions. Like I would really not like a very hard like diversity requirement. Like I will use that in my hiring practice. I will look for a diversity hire, absolutely. But at the end of the day, I want to prioritize meritocracy above everything. So,
but when you're talking about hiring, it's you're deciding if you want to onboard someone that is from outside the DAO. But what happens if you're promoting someone on diversity policy? It has to be covering situations like this as well, or
so this is a conversation.
Hiring external. It's a totally different conversation, but
this is a kind of tangent conversation. Let's bring it back to the core unit offboarding stuff and how we manage that. So I see Tim Black and Will Remore had their hands up. I didn't see who was first, so I'm going to give it to Tim Black since he's at the top of my screen.
Oh, all right. Everyone hear me all right? Cool. So I just want to echo something you said earlier, David, because I think we got off track from that. I think there is a balance to be struck here, because there are these situations where we do want offboarding to be relatively swift if there's bad actors or malicious intent or things that adversely affect the DAO. But we also want to have a better process for offboarding either a core unit itself or the facilitator leading it. And one of the things that you brought up as a prompt for a question, which I actually think is a better part of our process, is the voluntary versus involuntary nature of offboarding a facilitator, which I truly think is actually just a revision to the facilitator MIP, which is sort of in process. I think Paper Imperium put a doc down there. And so I just want to add a call out that, you know, some more eyes in there would be pretty helpful. But I think that might solve a lot of our problems if part of offboarding is that you have to be very specific about what the problems are, and you have to basically fill out a template. So there's somewhat of a set of guardrails around actually removing someone versus a set of subjective arguments put into a public forum, which is obviously, as we can tell, less than ideal.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Will, see your hand up. Want to go for it? Appreciate you joining us at such an early hour for you.
Yeah, it's not always. It's all good. So can you guys hear me? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think this discussion actually brings a number of I guess policy related discussions that have been happening for a significant amount of time, and have been actually concerns of mine for a very long time. I've had numerous discussions. I think I'm a private person, so I tend to have those ahead of time in private rather than publicly, because I don't want to necessarily harm anyone in particular by having a discussion that is a concern. I think this brings, at least it's not necessarily related only to facilitator onboarding or offboarding, but more policies that kind of can be good practice or best practice. And I think there's two levels here, and that will depend really on the teams that are involved, the core units. So there's probably like a very high level DAO policy around defining what, you know, for example, what is the definition of a serious misconduct of someone or anyone, and it can be actually facilitated, but it can also be contributors, because we should consider that, because contributors are involved in a lot of important indirect decision making for the DAO, right? Otherwise, facilitators will be doing the whole work for everybody. So I think it's important to have a little bit of definition that on the DAO level. On more like a core unit level, it's probably harder to define policies that should apply across the floor. But if I think, for example, on areas which are closer to real world financing, I'm thinking about practices that are more related to, you know, codes of conduct around conflicts of interest and the like. And I think it's important that some of those codes of conduct, they start to be drafted up, even if it's just for a specific core unit, because a specific core unit has a lot of implications in things that should a DAO be found that, you know, at the same time, you know, there was an involvement of facilitators in any misdealing on, for example, like a real world assets relationship with counterparties and so on. If we were to be considered a serious protocol in this space, and now we have not only institutions but counterparties of a higher, bigger size and all that involved, we do need to put our big boy pants on and keep and actually not be anymore like you know, it's a DAO, who cares, you know. At the end of the day, it's still is important in that we show that we are serious about what we are doing. And I think that's part of that. And I think maybe to the level more like code of conduct and so on, I think it's more like probably for us in this specific area of real world assets. I don't know whether that applies across the floor, maybe, but yeah, I just wanted to point out that this has been a long-term concern, and this is maybe something that then abide by those that are related to those areas.
Thanks, Phil. I see some comments from Juan in the chat. I don't know if you can join us on voice or not, Juan.
Yeah, I also saw just in case put up his hand. Well,
We start there, yeah, Justin.
Juan said nah.
All right. Yeah, I just want to mirror a bit of what Will was touching in here. I think this also ties in that we need to have a discussion about the degree of autonomy that facilitators will enjoy. I think with the organizational form we have, we probably have to give the facilitators a pretty big room of autonomy. But it also, offboarding, as is mentioned, is not only a process that happens at the DAO level, but it also happens in the CUs themselves. And we probably need to distinguish which kind we're talking about. My perspective going into this has been from the MakerDAO level, which is the ones we kind of have been dealing with. We haven't really been seeing anything from inside the CUs so far, but of course that is something that we'll also have to handle down the line, and it also touches into another bigger issue in who can make commitments on MakerDAO's behalf. Because like it was said, when someone is talking to someone from a CU, it's a very natural to reaction to assume that that person is speaking for all of MakerDAO, whereas that person may or may not be in a position to actually do so. And we also see some of those same troubles surface with counterparties contacting delegates, contacting core unit members, basically more or less trying at random to find someone in the MakerDAO to speak to. So that, but it's a bit of a tangent, but it's still important to recognize that there are actually several levels here.
Appreciate those comments. Yeah, we're getting a lot of good stuff on the side, so.
I do wanna kind of read out my notes for what the components of an ideal offboarding policy seem to be based on a lot of the things everybody has said. So number one, there seems to be a desire for a better review process and a better, just kind of a fairer review process. Number two, there's kind of a desire for definitions for explicitly bad behavior that warrants swifter offboarding versus, sort of more intermediary issues that might require like not necessarily offboarding, but like repair, right? Then there's also this other component of prioritizing a gradient of actions that make offboarding voluntary when possible. And this ties into the private to public conversation that we were having that Kianga was bringing up, kind of, how, like, where is privacy appropriate? At what level does it get escalated? And so, yeah, those are kind of some of the key things that I'm hearing. So just to bring it into focus for everybody at the high level.
I just want to say one last thing here, because I was saying it in chat. I've been a freelance contractor for a good chunk of my life. I had very formal contracts with all the clients that I worked with, okay, including exit clauses, complaints, performance measures, straight up. These contracts were enforceable in a court, right? In a jurisdiction, right? They were signed by a client and an intermediary possibly, right? We don't have this in the DAO. We don't even have a mechanism to do it. And so that kind of leaves contractors in a really weird position, right? With the DAO. Governance can kind of just do what it wants and dump a contractor at will, right? For no cause, straight up. And what's the recourse? And so I'm just going to leave it there, because that's kind of where I see the real issue sitting here, is we need a mechanism to basically manage that kind of relationship in a contractual obligation way that's well defined.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point, Maker, man.
Just a comment, like, I mean, the DAO can't, like, MakerDAOs can't directly like offboard like contributors, right? Like, this is kind of the point. We don't have votes for that. And I agree, it's not so simple where like how to define contractors and facilitators in terms of whether they're contractors or employees or whatever, or like basically nothing. But like, so like, I mean, the contractors themselves have potentially some sort of relationship with the contributors themselves have some sort of relationship with their facilitator, which might be like legally enforceable or might not be. Like the only position that kind of doesn't have that, or doesn't have the option of doing that, I guess, right, is the relationship between the facilitators and the DAO itself, because the DAO can't execute legal agreements. So I wouldn't say it's the case that the DAO can just get rid of like contractors, and they can get rid of facilitators or core units as a whole. So like not that so that level of granularity, I guess.
I mean, there's also something to say about at-will employment being the default in lieu of such, kind of like a rich set of being able to produce contracts. And core units, I'm sure, can produce those contracts. Like many core units have their own entities and their own relationships with their own contractors. So I don't know if everybody's doing at-will employment, but I'm sure some might not be. But yeah, it is definitely an interesting topic to consider.
Yeah, I might just add from the governance perspective that it is a question of scaling as well, right? Like we've talked about several different reasons why the DAO, why maker holders might want to remove CU, and several different levels or reasons that can lead to that. And it's important to keep that in mind when writing our processes for the future, that we're trying to pick something that is both flexible where it needs to be and rigid where it doesn't. Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of these things you kind of have to go through them once to really see the flaws or see the holes in what you initially propose as like text versus when it happens in real life.
Yeah. I have a second prompt slide if people are interested. I think we covered a lot of these questions, so I'm just kind of sanity checking myself if this one is relevant. Yeah, the second question of what are general issues we can bring up, everybody's been kind of bringing up already, so we're not going to ask that. And then to the question of how do we navigate these instances with minimal PR damage, and PR also applies to would-be hires, right? Seeing this stuff, would-be core units, and also the disruption of morale within the organization of existing core units. Yeah, we did actually cover these questions pretty sufficiently, so just go back to my first prompt. It's a little bit more fundamental. Will Remor asks an interesting question. Should have at least some form. Should we have at least some form of contract between core unit facilitator entities and contributors be enforced by the DAO? So that's an interesting one. Wouldn't it be? Yeah. Nicholas, do you wanna comment? Why no?
Yeah, look, I really think the DAO should just stay out of internal affairs of core units. Look, the DAO doesn't even get the opportunity, right, to hire or fire contributors, right? What the DAO does is it, offers people the opportunity to be facilitators who present them with a plan of, I'm going to do this for the DAO and I'm going to need this much budget. But from that point on, the facilitators kind of have autonomy to run that operation however they see fit. Now, with this previous discussion we had with respect to, I think someone in the chat used the word public executions. I mean, this is the only way it can kind of work in a DAO, right? You either have shady stuff going on behind the scenes, or you're completely transparent and you do it all in a public manner. That's thumbs the ropes for being in a DAO, right? This isn't a corporation. And, to the extent that facilitators take on, the risk of, career stuff, right? With everything being aired out in public, right? You could get fired and everyone could see that you did or why you did, right? and that could affect your career, right? There's a very simple solution for this, and it's just called a self-selection for people, right? If people see that that those are the consequences of being a facilitator, less people will just want to be a facilitator, and that's fine. And in a free market kind of economy, the way the DAO adjusts is you just offer people more compensation in those positions, and then done, right? It's the same kind of relationship that contractors versus employees have in a traditional corporation, where contractors are typically paid more because they have less job security, right? And this dynamic, I think, is more so the same. But yeah, I really want to get away from this kind of centrally managed like policies from the DAO for internal affairs. I think the DAO should handle the macro and not really get involved on the micro side.
See, Justin, you still have your hand up. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I do. In general, I agree with what Nicholas just said. I think the default setting should be that the DAO should deal with the facilitator and the facilitator should deal with the CU. That should be the basic working on things. I can see some scenarios where something happening inside the CU could be serious enough that the DAO would need to prompt the facilitator, but I still think it would be extremely severe before the DAO itself would have to reach into a CU to do anything. If we start meddling into the CUs as a DAO, we're going to drown in micromanagement, and it's going to be horribly inefficient. So I think Niklas is making a very valid point here that we need to react at the proper levels. What I've seen from traditional organizations is also as more information becomes available, the temptation from higher level management to go down and micromanage becomes increases with it. And as a DAO with more or less full access to the information, I mean, that temptation is just going to be all the much greater, which means we have to show restraint in allowing the facilitators to have some autonomy. But of course, with that autonomy comes great responsibility and a greater chance of being removed as a facilitator if the DAO feels the CU is mismanaged as a whole. But as for the public versus private discussion, I think I also think Nicholas has a point. I think it's going to be very hard to get this into private channels in an organized manner without empowering agents, which will threaten the decentralization of the whole protocol. I still think we can do better when it comes to the processes. I think key words here are predictability. If we have a more steps along the way, if we're raising the issues and discussing the issues publicly before we're launching the offboarding process, we still get to keep the public discourse. We get to have everything out in the open, but it's not, and we will normalize also negative discussions, if you will, before they become so big or become so damaging that we have to go through with an involuntary offboarding process. And if we do this enough, I think also facilitators is going to see the writing on the wall. If they're like every second week someone is complaining about something they're doing, and they're probably going to take the hint and step down voluntarily because they see they're not a great fit for what the community wants, before we have to go through a forced offboarding, which is kind of, in my mind, should be something of a last resort from the DAO when it comes to handling a facilitator or a core unit.
See, Mariano has his hand raised. Feel free to get on the mic.
No, I can see that there's a general agreement on the fact that nobody wants policies that will micromanage, and I think this is, like this. I agree with that idea too, because this goes against the spirit of the DAO, right? But Jason was talking about a set of scenarios that are realistically necessary to act, and this is where we need to go, because if we get only the general image of what we should do as a general, we're not going to get to distinguish the different cases. In traditional companies, when I was working for traditional companies, startups, we also care a lot about what happens to the employee when they're finally disconnected. So one of the things we did was to start an outplacement program, for example, to help with the person find another opportunity. Of course, this is not the case. We're not discussing that, but just I'm bringing this as an idea of how can you stop the collaboration between a contributor and the DAO in a good manner or in a bad manner. So Nick was saying something that, so it is a sort of a public execution. So where would you like to position ourselves when it comes to offboarding a facilitator that has brought a lot to the DAO? And what are the reasons why? So if we only get the general idea of what should we do, of course, we'll never reach, like the how risky it is for DAO. And yes, there are some scenarios in which we might need to get into the core unit and see what's going on there, because at the end of the day, our public image can be compromised at different levels if something important is happening inside the core unit. So there are some cases where it is important to have at least some guidelines, good practices, and also this is where we have to go, because the general idea we already have it, the general process is already in place. So let's go to the details, and this is where it's important. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mariano.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a little bit of a hunk. Well, it sounds like you're arguing for something like an internal affairs core unit where contributors who feel like they were unfairly offboarded or like something like that can kind of raise an issue, and then that internal affairs core unit can like go and investigators. That's kind of what I'm hearing. Is that about right?
Yes, and I mean, like there could be a committee for different situations, but at the end of the day, as I said, like core units can. The idea is that they will be completely independent, but what they do towards the market in social media, in terms of how they manage their products, they can affect one another, and it's super important. So I agree that we should have an internal affairs, if you want to call it, but we should really distinguish the type of situations where this is important.
I do want to be. Yeah, go for it.
Go ahead, David. I was just gonna highlight that the sidebar was talking a little bit kind of about a previous topic we had with the ability of pseudonymous people to raise these proposals, particularly with offboarding. That kind of messes with the game theory. I don't know if anyone wanted to talk about that or not. But,
I mean, I think the revision to the offboarding requirements, and particularly the template and kind of a higher standard for presenting reasons, is gonna make troll offboarding requests a little less disruptive, because obviously when somebody brings up an offboarding request, it takes away time from the facilitator who's being offboarded. They have to respond. They have to, so I don't know, you could dox, not dox, maybe that's the wrong word, but you could like DDoS, maybe that's a better analog, a facilitator's time by just like every couple of months, like spinning up an anon account and making them make a case for themselves. And not only, even if it's invalid, the very fact that that happens creates negative sentiment around the core unit, whether it's true or not. So, I think to some extent we saw that with the marketing core unit to some extent, but I don't know. That's just my personal.
So I'm gonna make a quick point on this. I think that like action like becomes a lot more effective in some cases than others, right? Because I'm kind of imagining someone doing that for like P, right, or like like Hookup Alpha or something, and like I seriously doubt it would have got the same or had the same impact So I'm not sure like how much of this is like a global problem with sort of, you know, like add-on accounts or sub-puppet accounts, versus it's like CUs can get in a situation where they're like vulnerable to that, I guess, versus like it being a global problem. Yeah.
I think just going back to, so Dirk from protocol engineering, thinking about all of that we've been speaking about today, I think for me, I'm sort of leaning on the side of more, I guess I could call it like radical transparency for facilitators, not for team members. So there's, you know, anyone in the community, whether they're delegates or MKR holders or individuals who have an interest, can come to the forum, can come to Discord, can ask me directly as an accountable and responsible individual for the protocol engineering core unit team. That should happen. I'm more than open for that to continue happening, and you know, we should be accountable, responsible for anything that the core unit does. I think Nick's point there were great, that should stop at the facilitator, not the individuals of the team, because again, if there's a problem with the team, it's really a problem with me, and that discussion has to happen. I also like the point around expectations and predictable steps. So knowing what the goals are, making sure that the performance is discussed over time. I think it would be good to have some sort of a checklist someone brought up. That would be helpful to know, okay, you know, where do I lie? Where do I sit on the scale of performance? And we do have KPIs. These can be improved. I like some of the comments from LPro recently asking different core units. He had a couple of posts that were copied to different core units, and I'm sort of taking that on board for when we have our potential new term for the PE team and answering those up front. So I think that sort of discussion is really good. So yeah, I'm not really saying anything that's new, but yeah, definitely just leaning on the side of transparency for facilitators, and happy to have that dialogue continue. So yeah, I'm not seeing that discussion be overly noisy or taking too much time away. I think it all has to happen, and that's what facilitators are for. So happy to work with anyone on what sort of this expectation predictable steps may look like. But I think that's it for me. So good discussion. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Dirk.
Yeah, I would like to add something related to the feedback, because I agree with Juan that we should all facilitators like start conversations with delegates and other core units to get feedback on what we are doing. But I also know that maybe we are like, as a facilitator, like we are in the middle of 1,000 things, and maybe we are not sometimes doing it as frequent as we should, or maybe we don't know how frequent that process should be done. So it will be interesting if we can like all work together in a feedback framework, because I think that's what's missing maybe, because we get a lot of comments on the forum, but like, well, we don't know if like someone saying something, it's like what the community really thinks about what you're doing. There's a lot of noise in the forum. We all know that. So sometimes it's hard to like trust in someone. And if it's anon, it's more difficult to trust in what they say and follow that direction. So maybe it will be interesting to have like some sort of feedback framework, like have these checkpoints between all core units, like even between facilitators, like share best practices in our core units, understand how can we improve in the way we are managing our core unit, how we are showing our results to the DAO. Of course, SES, like they create these standards, but I think like we can improve on that.
and also like give feedback between core units and like have like, I don't know, like have a framework for that. And I think if we have the feedback that we can trust on, we can like work on that and improve what we are doing, and that will like create a better offboarding process in case it's necessary.
Yeah, and something that you said, Nadia, made me think, you know, the noise on the forum really makes it difficult for people to gather all of the facts, you know, especially if it's split across several threads, and also like as new information is added closer to the end of the vote, you know, like is everybody following along to the appropriate level? So that's kind of why I lean towards supporting something like maybe not like purely like an internal affairs core unit, but some assigned independent party to gather the facts and data and kind of present it to voters. Yeah, just a thought. I do also want to be mindful of time. We have about 20 minutes left. I feel like Peyton, you're about to say the same thing, right? So I know the ending part of the call is really just open discussion. So if we are satisfied with all of the conversation we've had on this topic thus far, we can move on to other things for these next 20 minutes. But additionally, if somebody does want to bring up like something that they feel is important about the last topic, please do. It's open discussion.
And we covered a lot of ground in the sidebar as well. So anything sprung your mind from those conversations, feel free to bring it into the main talk here.
Yeah, while people think of stuff if they want to bring up, I do want to make a mention about an upcoming change to the format of this call, the GNR call. So as many of you know, GovComms has been working with Wouter and with a lot of the other core unit facilitators to map initiatives and to kind of do these coordination calls. We call them stakeholder alignment calls. And we're developing this framework basically to have a more scalable tool to really track like all of the different initiatives at the DAO, where their progress is at, you know, and these practices of coordinating across various stakeholders really helps on like a lot of different levels. And so the format change that we're thinking of is to really bring out kind of these status updates that result from these stakeholder alignment calls. And so starting next week, we're going to be adding a small section after current events, whereby, you know, depending on the week and depending on the cadence of each initiative, we're going to be giving roadmap updates, essentially, and status updates. So something to look forward to on the next call actually is an update on the L2 roadmap. And so, yeah, just wanted to make a mention of that. Much of your feedback has been heard. I know people have a hard time following exactly where things are at with various initiatives, and we want you to know that we are addressing it and we are doing our best, and we're gonna make things a bit better. And hopefully this will be a good value add to this call, to the time people spend here. You know, 90 minutes is, you can get a lot done in 90 minutes. And so yeah.
Definitely appreciate that, David. Yeah, this is like our big kind of weekly event where we get a lot of talking heads together. So it's really great to see so many people pitching in and trying to make sure it's as good as it can be.
Yeah, also, I just want to, in general, push for a better culture of feedback. I think I see a lot of mixed views around feedback, like who's responsible for giving it when. I think anytime you see that something could be improved, being proactive and sharing it with the proper like gateholder or proper person, it'll make MakerDAO better. Whether it's valid, invalid, food for thought is important. And the fact that we have so many smart people here with such diverse perspectives is really important. So, on various publications, there's feedback surveys on various teams. There's product, there's like user interviews that you could probably sign up for. There's various ways that you can give feedback to people. So I just wanted to really kind of push that culture towards our group here at Maker. Justin, you raised your hand.
I just want to expand a little on what you're saying. And I found Maker to be a great collection of incredibly talented people. And I think also when you have something good to say, if you're impressed by something, say that to someone. That helps a lot. I mean, we're scattered all over the world. Sometimes we're working kind of in this isolation. Having someone actually recognize our work and, pat you on the back and say, hey, that's a good point, or this was a good solution. Do that as well.
Really good point. Agreed.
It's a great point, Justin. Thank you so much.
FYI, Justin, I think you're doing a great job.
Awesome. Always nice to end on good vibes as well. Do a last call here, just so no one feels unfairly pressured, but seems like we're trending towards winding this call down.
Yeah, cool. Not bad to give back 15 minutes to everybody. 15 times 51, that's a lot of minutes for a lot of people.
All the success then. Appreciate everyone for coming out here and for the really wide engagement. Like, it's really, really nice to have so many different people speaking on these calls and giving different perspectives.
So I would just have one question or just one comment. I feel like our superpower is to be able to attract overachievers who don't need like supervision, and that's probably our best hedge against poor performance. And I feel like the core units should be in charge for recruitment, but from a culture standpoint, there are probably some checklists to check in candidates. And I feel like just an idea, like having some guidelines in terms of recruitment that are more on the cultural alignment on the soft side, just guidelines for core unit facilitator to recruit. Because just a thought, because I personally think that recruiting the best people is our best hedge against the bad experience of offboarding. That's why I'm saying that.
Yeah, it would be good to have that. Thankfully, many of our facilitators, CU facilitators, are thoroughly aware of the culture here and the people we're trying to hire. Yeah, but something like a recommendation list never hurts.
Yeah, I'm thinking recommendation list and maybe interview guides. I don't know. Personally did like probably 2,000 interviews in my life because that was my job. And I don't know how versed people are in this, and some recommendation on like how to ask questions and dig for those types of information. Like could be just a 1 hour long video plus some recommendation on might be helpful.
Yeah, I think SCS might actually provide some guidance on like interviewing best practices, and I believe the talents use also might be cooking something up in that regard.
Yeah, definitely have a lot of resources we can leverage here, which is great. Well, I think we're going to wrap up there then. Appreciate everyone for coming out. This will be posted on our YouTube shortly, and yeah, we'll see everybody next week.